All right, welcome everyone to today's session. My name is Amanda Demmer. I'm the Program Coordinator and Learning Specialist for Community-Based Research Canada, and I'm the moderator for today's session. We have three final sessions in our Moving the Dial series. Today, we're joined by the Lake Superior Living Labs Network, Charles Levko and Lindsay Galway, on a presentation about co-creating just sustainabilities. This presentation today is brought to you, of course, by us at Community-Based Research Canada. We do acknowledge that the CBRCanada Secretariat is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples in land known as Waterloo, Ontario. We're a membership-based organization with the mission of advancing community-based research excellence in Canada by strengthening partnerships, building capacity, mobilizing knowledge, and championing community-based research among individuals, communities, and institutions. We're a social enterprise. We're funded entirely by our membership base of now over 50 member organizations. And the programming we provide to our members includes events like these, as well as events like our community of practice and other events that we host. I have just lost my hosting privileges, and I'm not sure why that's happened. Julia, is that you that signed in on the CBRCanada account? Here we go. Sorry about that small technical glitch. So as part of our programming and in the spirit of reconciliation, we open each of our e-learning events by reflecting on and amplifying the goals of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action. I put a lot of thought into what I wanted to highlight today, and I was thinking about our First Nations, Métis, Inuit people in Canada as being really leaders in sustainability and folks with voices that we could really learn from. So I thought to highlight Paul that we call upon the corporate sector in Canada to adopt the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a reconciliation framework and to apply its principles, norms, and standards to corporate policy and core operational activities involving Indigenous people and their lands and resources. So just reflecting that our First Nations folks have a lot we can learn about how to take care of our land and our resources, and corporate sector in Canada could learn a lot as well. At Community-Based Research Canada, we're committed to continual reflection on the interconnections between truth and reconciliation and the various topics that we approach using community-based research. Today's e-learning event, we're going to have this quick opening that I'll be doing. We'll move into the presentation by Charles Levko and Lindsay Galway, and then we will have our closing. Between that presentation and the closing, we'll have time for some question and answers. So I encourage everyone in the audience, if questions are coming to your mind throughout the presentation today, please enter them in the chat box at any time. I'll be monitoring the chat. We'll get to your questions at the end of the session. So please enter your questions in the chat as we go along today. We'll get to those, as many questions as we possibly can. I do ask everyone to keep their microphones muted during the presentation just to avoid any potential background noise. You're free to put your cameras on if you would like, particularly during the question and answer period, so we can see some faces. This event is recorded and will be posted on our website as well for any folks who aren't able to be here today that you think might want to watch this session. So I'm very honored to be introducing our panelists today, Dr. Charles Levko, the Canada Research Chair in Equitable and Sustainable Food Systems at Lakehead University, and Dr. Lindsay Galway, the Canada Research Chair in Social Ecological Health at Lakehead University. So I pass it over to them as they begin their presentation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Amanda. I'm going to start us off, and then I'm going to take the first part, and then I'll pass over to Lindsay. And thanks for that opening and the introduction. I think as will become clear in our presentation, not just recognizing the land we're on, but kind of identifying and naming, I think, the violence that settler colonialism does, not just here in Canada, but in other parts of the world, is an important part of our thinking around this whole project and how we're kind of engaging with communities across the Lake Superior watershed. So as Amanda mentioned, Lindsay and I are professors at Lakehead. So we are located on the north shore of Lake Superior, the largest freshwater lake in the world. We're on the traditional territory of the Fort William First Nation. We're part of the Robinson Superior Treaty, which was signed in 1850. Today, our plan is to tell you a little bit about the Lake Superior Living Labs Network, which is a community campus partnership that Lindsay and I, along with a range of academics and community partners, Indigenous communities, have been working on over the last maybe 5 years in total now, and going. I'll just start by saying the Lake Superior Living Labs network, and actually you could switch the slide, Amanda. You can see a bit about, yeah, there we go. That's our graphic of what this thing is that we're doing here. And it is, I want to start by just saying it is a concept that we are collectively working on together. And we are in a bit of a transition, which Lindsay will talk a bit more about. So part of beyond just telling you what we're doing and how we are thinking of moving the dial, we're really interested in feedback, ideas. If folks also have thoughts about what we're doing, whether that's as part of this session or offline afterwards, we really welcome that. We're open to everything, all kinds of feedback and comments. But my plan is to give you a bit of an overview of the Lake Superior Living Labs Network, and again, some of our thinking around it. And then I'm going to pass over to Lindsay, who's going to talk a bit more about some examples of what we've been doing together over the past few years, specifically in the Thunder Bay region of the network. So I'll just, again, so what you're looking at, this is our kind of graphic of kind of how we envision the Lake Superior Living Labs Network. It was created both as a response to many of the challenges we're facing across the Lake Superior watershed and beyond, but also to take advantage of, and to catalyze many of the existing actions and initiatives that were already happening, and bringing them together. And, Lindsay and I have often talked about, coming to this place. Both of us didn't grow up here, we're from here, and really looking for ways to kind of learn about, connect with, partner with, engage with lots of stuff going on in the region. And the Lake Superior Living Labs Network kind of evolved as part of that. And when we established it, when it was first established, kind of in the 2017, 2018 time period, pre-pandemic, it was really meant to be a platform, again, to connect researchers, community groups in Canada, in the United States, across multiple Indigenous territories, with the goal of really developing and expanding partnerships and place-based collaborative initiatives grounded within the watershed. So using the watershed as a kind of platform for the work we're all doing. And the Lake Superior Living Labs Network is meant to be a networked and nested living lab, establishing connections, to increase the impact of teaching, research, and action focused on social, environmental justice, and sustainability. And it really aims to increase, again, the impact of not just sustainability, so that concept of just sustainabilities, which I'll talk a bit about in a minute, at the nexus of water, land, and food. So you can see that in our little blue bubbles at the top: climate, energy, and individual and community well-being. The network has evolved to currently be hosted by 4 primary hubs. So here in Thunder Bay, in Duluth, Minnesota, in Houghton, Michigan, and in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, on the Canadian side of the border. And really, all of the hubs are rooted in partnerships with community-based organizations and Indigenous communities. And as a team, we've really been reflecting on kind of the ideas that kind of undergird our work and the network more broadly. And we've been thinking about this, and what I just want to talk about briefly is this idea of discontinuity thinking that we collectively have been kind of trying to respond to a little bit, versus this idea of watershed or confluence thinking. So I'm just going to go over that very briefly before we kind of get into what we're actually doing, because I think this kind of underlies the work we're doing, but is really how we're thinking about the work we're doing together across the watershed. Amanda, can you switch the slide for me, please? Great. So again, this idea of discontinuity versus watershed thinking. So Lake Superior, as I mentioned, is the world's largest freshwater lake by surface area. It spans Canada, the United States, many indigenous territories. It collects water from over 200 tributaries. Really spans an expansive coastline of over 2,500 islands. It supports a diversity of wildlife that are home to rare and endangered species of birds, amphibians, mammals, along with over 30 native species of fish. And for many indigenous and settler communities, the lake is really a vital part of our identity, a sense of place, cultural heritage, our livelihoods. However, Lake Superior is under significant ecological stress from chemical contaminants, several substances of concern like microplastics and mercury, overfishing, invasive species, habitat degradation, the climate crisis, and the list goes on. The current way that the lake tends to be managed is heavily impacted by, again, this idea of discontinuity thinking. So this idea of disconnection, categorization, siloed approaches focused on control and profit. And the dominant approach is really rooted in what we think of as racial capitalism, settler colonial logics, that's led to land dispossession, social inequalities, and the degradation of ecosystems. So the land and the waters that were once connected by kinship and have been increasingly divided by private property and political boundaries. The pollution of the land and the water have resulted in really devastating effects on the ecosystems, the people that depend on them for survival. And there's really a wide range of health impacts that have been identified in this region, and inequalities that have been attributed to resource extraction, activities such as industrial development, mining, and forestry, which are the primary sources of economic wealth in this region. So this idea of discontinuities is really embedded into dominant systems of policy and decision-making and really used to maintain power and control for certain groups. We have talked a lot about this idea of overly simplified solutions, risking kind of reproducing and in many ways intensifying power dynamics along with vulnerabilities of particular communities. And addressing these issues really needs to take an interconnected perspective or approach rooted in relationships and social and environmental justice. So the Lake Superior Living Labs Network really aims to focus on the potential of this kind of networked and nested living labs to establish a connection and increase the impacts of place-based activities focused on social environmental justice, again, and sustainability at the core of everything we do. And we've been thinking about this in kind of three possibilities to counter discontinuity thinking that are really relevant to our collective work here in the watershed. So I'm going to just talk about those very, very briefly. So slide, please. So the first way that we've been thinking about this is through this idea of living labs and building meaningful relationships. So living labs is a concept that really aims to kind of co-create innovative solutions to complex challenges through interdisciplinary, place-based experiential learning and community-engaged action in the built and natural environments. So living labs have become a way for academics and community partners to collectively conduct research, engage in action projects in this kind of learning by doing, and an integration of research and innovation in the real world. So outside of this is that idea of the living part of the labs. So instead of engaging in projects in that kind of isolated or decontextualized setting, living labs are really intended to create dynamic spaces where ideas and solutions can be co-created through partnerships. Next slide, please. So the second idea is this idea of engaging just sustainabilities, which I mentioned a little bit already. So this idea of just sustainabilities really evolved from environmental justice movements as racialized communities argued that and argued correctly, I would suggest, that the distribution of hazards are disproportionate and unjust. So they actively mobilized to protect their health and well-being. And this idea of just sustainabilities, which was first kind of coined by a colleague of ours, Julian Ajiman, in the US, recognizes that interconnections between social and environmental injustices and that it's an approach that provides guidance for working together across sectors, disciplines, and really challenges these ideas of discontinuity thinking, as I've been talking about them. Next slide, please. So this third kind of area that we've been thinking about as underlying our work is the idea of co-creating nested partnerships across watersheds. So here, this idea of watershed collaborations that we're kind of playing with has really typically been focused on water resource management and engineering to respond to challenges related to economic development. So watersheds, though, we are suggesting through our work, can also be seen as a kind of social ecological systems. So a place for understanding and fostering relationships with other humans, the more than human, and ecological systems, all based on kind of health, sustainability, and justice. So the idea here of flow and movement, of upstream, of downstream characteristics of watersheds provides a kind of approach to examining and addressing interrelated issues through this idea of just sustainabilities. So the Lake Superior Living Labs Network is really built on these ideas of watershed thinking to try to strengthen existing teaching, again, research, action projects, and supportive initiatives in each of the 4 hubs, but also to serve as a platform to connect those 4 hubs and develop new partnerships and collaborative initiatives across the Lake Superior watershed. So next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through all of these projects, but this is just a very initial, a very, very tiny sampling of some of these cross projects or cross initiatives that we've been doing that where we've attempted to kind of bring folks together. So one of those areas is through what we originally had been calling mini meetups and webinars, where we essentially have tried to bring together people involved in different activities and research from the different hubs into a space where they can dialogue, communicate with each other, share their work, and then have the folks from all around the region participate in that. So again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but just again, a sampling of what's up here. We did one session on the thin outdoors, creating a culture of fat inclusion in outdoor recreation, where we had Dr. Lee Potvin from here at Lakehead University sharing information about fat activism, the importance of intersectionality when addressing fat phobia, and we had audience members really engage in a dialogue with Lee and each other about those issues. We had a great session with Lita McKellar, who's is the sustainability coordinator here at Lakehead University, and Ryan Irk, who's at the College of Scholastica as part of the Duluth Hub, showing really exploring this idea of post-secondary institutions across the Lake Superior watershed, thinking about ideas of sustainability and kind of sharing their own work and dialoguing with each other. We've also had some action research projects across the hubs. These are, again, just 3 of the many projects that have gone on. Water is Life. We had a graduate student who was working with us looking at creative action to heal bodies of water, and did some work with artists across the watershed and how they were representing ideas of water. And as part of her research, yes, she wrote a master's thesis, but also created a bunch of really beautiful pieces of art and video and photos, which are, like everything else, all available on our website. I'll just mention one other, because it was something I was directly involved in, at the bottom right there, the film, a documentary film, Lake Superior Our Helper, Stories from Batcheotung and Anishinaabe First Fisheries. And that was a project we did with a local filmmaker in partnership with Batchewana First Nations, where we created a full-length documentary film about their Batchewana's relationship to fishing, Indigenous food sovereignty, and self-determination through their relationship to fish as more than just food. So again, that's just a bit of a sampling of some of the cross-hub projects. I think I will stop there and I'll maybe turn over to Lindsay, who can talk a bit more about some of the other work that's happening in Thunder Bay and across the Lake Superior Living Labs network. So over to you, Lindsay.
Thank you, Charles and Amanda. You can go to the next slide. And just to say a little bit more about myself. So as you heard in the introduction from Amanda, and thanks for that nice introduction and foregrounding, Amanda. I am a researcher and I hold a Canada Research Chair, but I am also many more things than that. I am also a teacher, so I teach about climate change and ecological perspectives on health. I'm a mom. I have 3 young children. I'm a local climate activist, and also a lover of our dear lake, and it really inspires my work in so many ways. And you've certainly seen some of the ways in which it inspires our work in the context of the Living Labs Network in particular. And of course, also an uninvited guest on the traditional territory of Fort William First Nation. So another role that I hold, and is particularly relevant to what we're talking about today, is what we use the language of the Thunder Bay Hub Lead. So I've had the privilege of having a sort of leading role in the context of the Thunder Bay realm of our Living Labs Network. And so what we thought that I would share about today was some of the story of the Thunder Bay Hub. And again, it's really just a taster with the amount of time that we have today, but a taster of some of the projects that we've been working on in the context of our Thunder Bay Hub. And so again, as Charles, shared really nicely, we're taking this nested approach. So we're doing this work in relationship building and amplifying of existing and strengthening existing work at both the watershed and also at the local level. So in the context of Thunder Bay. So that's what I'm talking about in particular, or primarily for the next 10 minutes or so today. So in our Thunder Bay Hub, I wanted to begin this story by saying actually how we started our learning and work together, because I think it was a really beautiful way to start our collaborative work. And so we started our work with a process, which is a labyrinth walk and sharing circle. And so you can see some of our members, this is just some of us doing this labyrinth walk process. And we reflected on together and then shared in a sharing circle our thoughts about these 2, I think, really important questions. So what do you need from this emerging collaborative to sustain your journey? And what can you imagine creating together? And for me in my role, this was really a really great way and an important way to start, because it helped sort of determine what were some priorities and where is energy and what is necessary to keep our community partners interested and involved and engaged, and to sustain their learning and working with us. And so you can see there on your slide some of the main ideas. So I basically listened and we had notes from the sharing circle process, and I sort of consolidated those, and that has informed our work moving forward. And so really important was relationships and storytelling. So you can see that in the first 2 points. So sharing ideas, sharing perspectives, and sharing stories. And so you'll see that reflected in some of the projects that I speak to later today. And this really important work, which we continue to focus on, and I think we'll be continuing to focus on moving forward, of supporting relationship building. And that means among our hub, with the network, and with place, so with our community and our watershed. And also important for our members is really moving beyond sort of dominant ways of thinking, knowing, and doing, and that emerged in a number of different ways. And we've been really trying to do that in our work. And also collectively creating change and engaging with these ideas of emergence, diversity, care, restoration, sort of woven through the projects that we were working on together. So you can move now to the next slide, Amanda. And so the first project that we began as a group, and we established a working group with some of our hub members and community partners, and was led by one of our graduate students, Gavin Shields. And so this project was called the Sustainability Stories video series. So all of these videos are available on our website, and Amanda kindly shared the link earlier, I noticed. And so our intention with the Sustainability Stories was to co-create short videos to do this work of profiling some of the sustainability related projects and work happening here in Thunder Bay that our community partners and other partners were leading, and also to highlight some of our learnings and to move towards or start doing this work of synthesizing what sustainability means in this place. And we did the work of co-creating these sustainability stories in ways that fostered relationship building relationships. And so also I think worth noting is these were crafted to, of course, tell stories, but also share and reflect some of the higher level themes of the Lake Superior Living Labs Network. So you can see, again, I won't just for time speak to these directly in any particular way, but you can see one of our videos was with Elder Gene here in the top corner, and he shared really what sustainability means from his perspective and from an Indigenous perspective in particular. Here you can see this is me and one of my colleagues here from some of our climate change and health work with youth and elders in Fort William First Nation, some of our seed saving and seed sovereignty work in a video up in the with the sunflower. there. I'm just realizing you can't see my cursor, but hopefully you followed which videos I was speaking to there. So again, you can access all those short videos on our website to learn more about some of this work that's happening here in Thunder Bay. So next slide. So the next project I wanted to speak to was perhaps a highlight for me. I don't know if you would agree, Charles, but I think it was also a highlight for many of our community partners. And this was a project called the Climate Action Field School. And this was really successful in a lot of ways. And so we did this twice, but the first Climate Action Field School was back in 2021. And this was, really a very unique approach to teaching and learning around climate action and climate justice. And so this program was oriented specifically towards young adults and grounded in a transformative education model. So specifically, it's called the head, heart, hand model of transformative education. So that means engaging our hands in experiential learning. It means recognizing the affective dimensions of climate change and climate justice, and also recognizing some of the cognitive and sort of learning dimensions around climate change and climate justice. And so specifically what we were aiming to do was engage with climate action and climate justice from diverse perspectives and learn with and from our community partners. And while doing so, continuing to do this work of fostering relationships and also really trying to foster a sense of empowerment for all of those involved. And so we did this primarily through workshops and field trips, site visits, and we also did a number of online events. So one of the unique things about this Climate Action Field School is we took this nested approach. So we had a field school that was happening in Thunder Bay, and there were also Climate Action Field Schools happening in our other hubs. And so at a number of times throughout the events, we convened together across our hubs and had some online virtual sharing and learning together. And so just quickly, you can see in some of these images, so in the top left, you see knowledge keeper Marcel, who shared some teachings, some Indigenous teachings related to 13 moons and what that means for climate action and sustaining climate action. And the next there, you can see us on a sustainability tour with some of our city partners from Earth Care, Thunder Bay. And then you can see here we are in this is sort of a bird's eye view of our group in a Voyager canoe out on the lake. So this was a day where we spent together, working together, paddling together, doing that relationship building work with each other in the lake. This was certainly a highlight for all of our participants, getting out in this canoe and seeing the lake in a new way and getting to know it in a more meaningful way. And then on the bottom left corner, you can see us out at Lily Street Garden doing getting our hands dirty, right, and learning about seed saving and food sovereignty work and what that has to do with climate action and climate justice. We also learned about organizing climate justice work here. We had some climate organizers in the center of the bottom photograph there who shared some of their learnings, and we practiced doing some climate activism together. And then we also did the final picture there. You can see us. We did some co-creating of art using local inks with a local climate activist and artist here in Thunder Bay. And so that was a 7-day long, really intensive field school. And as I said, really a highlight, I think, for our hub. And so next slide. So as I said, we did this again in 2023 because it was really quite successful. And it was a different iteration. So we took some of what we learned from 2021 Climate Action Field School, but also wanted to prioritize based on some interests of our partners working with high school students. So our 2021 field school was with young adults, so sort of 18 to 30 age group, and this was with grade 12 students. And this was actually just this past summer, and it was a youth engagement dimension of the great C2U Expo, which CBRCanada plays a leading role in. And so this was a little bit shorter, so we did 4 days of this sort of head, heart, hand climate action teaching and learning. And so you can see some of our photos from this Climate Action Field School. And I'll keep moving just to make sure we have a good amount of time for discussion. So the next project that I wanted to speak to was something called a Climate Action Park. And this was a really took some time for this project to come to life. So we've been working on this for a number of years, and it officially opened this summer, the Lakehead Climate Action Park. And what you're looking at there was you can barely see it perhaps, but this is Lakehead University campus, and we are very lucky and on our campus, and that McIntyre River flows right through our campus, lands. And so we developed and sort of restored some of the shoreline here, where you can see this bit of green outline, and that's now where our Climate Action Park is located. And so this was a project that we envisioned and implemented with the Lakehead University Office of Sustainability, the Thunder Bay Remedial Action Plan, and also partners from the city of Thunder Bay. And one of the first things that we did is we took some time in the first year of this project and held visioning workshops with partners or with faculty, staff, and students across the university campus, and also community partners, and really asked and wanted to hear about, what should a Climate Action Park look like and feel like. Climate Action Park is sort of a new idea. It was inspired from some work happening in Europe. We haven't seen a lot of climate action parks in Canada, but hopefully, our example will inspire others to engage in similar kinds of restoration and engagement work. And so you can see here on this infographic some of the key ideas that emerged. So it was really important for this park, this space, to be welcoming, that it demonstrated and inspired action, that it was a place for people to connect and do this work of relationship building. So next slide, Amanda. And we'll just see some of the actual features of this park. So here you can see what this park it's just sort of grass. You could see in that overhead picture. And now you can see there's some of the features of a park are signage. So you can see there's 2 signs on this slide that are located at the Climate Action Park. There's a fire pit and an Indigenous planting area. Just the black-eyed Susans, I think, were the only plants still alive when I went and took this picture the other day. There's a habitat restoration, amphibian habitat on the shoreline. There's no mow zone. So all of this demonstrating of different climate action initiatives in the park itself. And it also serves as a place for gathering and learning and working. So the Climate Action Field School that I mentioned earlier, the 2023 Climate Action Field School, this was sort of our home base. So we spent most of our time at this space. That we had a fire ban at the time due to a drought at the time, so we weren't able to have fires at this place, but it was a place where we convened, where we did our learning and working, and it was really a beautiful outdoor learning space to do that work. So next slide, please, Amanda. And the last project I'll speak to, so this is a newer project. We're working on this now, and it's something we're calling the Waterways Radio Show and Podcast. So really, from a high level, what we're doing is sharing some of the stories of waterways that flow into Lake Superior. And so we're starting with the Pigeon River and moving through some of the other sort of key rivers that hold important stories that really ought to be told. So the Kaministiquia, Lake Nipigon, and Long Lac Diversion. And so we've gathered voices and stories from a number of folks in our community. And we're just sort of crafting those into shorter, more concise, and weaving together the podcasts currently, and those should be available soon. And we're actually passing this project off to our Sault Ste. Marie and Algoma Hub partners, who will be moving around the lake and then passing on to Houghton and then Duluth and back to us, this project. So we're telling the stories moving around the lake in this way. And so the next slide, we just wanted to recognize, so I was just sharing some of the projects that we've been doing, particularly in our Thunder Bay hub, but we wanted to just name that really central to this work that we've been doing is learning by doing. So doing this work of co-creating a nested and networked network and relationship building. And so we just wanted to briefly share a couple of ways in which we're doing that. So really important just to really honor a great student we've been working with, Rachel Portinga, and she's really using the Lake Superior Living Labs Network as a case study to learn more about how to do this really challenging work of collaboration across multiple boundaries oriented towards addressing equity, sustainability, and health challenges. So she's developing a grounded theory to support. She's doing a number of interviews with our members to explore and learn about the influence of Living Labs work and thinking and watershed-based thinking and work, what that means for collaboration. And also she's been leading a series of visioning workshops, which is both helping us learn what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what could we be doing differently or better moving forward. And also we've conducted an annual survey to learn from our members about their experiences and to inform our work. And also within the context of these surveys, specifically a social network analysis. So you can see there on the screen a couple of sociograms, which are illustrating communication over time and how this has changed between 2020 and 2022. So these are just a couple of examples of how we're doing this work of learning by doing. And then final slide there, Amanda. So we also just wanted to name, so we have been funded and resourced specifically through a SHIRC partnership development grant. We were coming to the end of this grant. So we're at this point where I think many of us arrive with our networking work and some of our projects, which is sort of a big learning loop and doing this work and this reflective practice in terms of where we're headed next. So we just wanted to name that and perhaps even invite up, thoughts or from folks about where we might be headed or some of our reflections and some of what we're thinking about moving forward at this sort of important learning loop for the Lake Superior Living Labs Network. So that's where I'll end and what we wanted to share, and we'll pass back to Amanda and open up for questions and conversation. Thank you.
All right, so we have the chance now for question and answers. So any questions you might have for Charles or Lindsay, feel free to enter them in the chat box, and we'll have the next kind of 15 minutes to have some discussion together. There was one question that came in, Patsy, and I don't know, Lindsay or Charles, if you'll know anything about this, or if anyone else in the room knows anything they want to share. But Patsy asking about if there's any type of field schools happening in Alberta doing similar things.
Yeah, so I haven't seen any that were really using similar kinds of approaches, and in particular the head, heart, hand model, or really prioritizing justice in the context of Alberta. And so, Patsy, if you go onto our website, you'll see we actually had a number of pretty helpful resources. So we have a nice report, which really includes like a lot of the specifics of what we did and why we did it. We have this pretty cool, I think it's a sort of 360 tour. It's sort of an interesting way to navigate generally, but anyway, so definitely worth exploring if you're interested in this kind of thing. So that's available at our website. We also had a couple of videos that showed just a synthesis of participant experiences and some experiences from those of us who were involved, some of the core organizers and some of our perspectives. So that may be helpful within the context of our work, but yeah, I haven't seen any specific examples in the context of Alberta. Charles, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I don't know any specifics other than to say, building on what you said, that like we didn't invent this concept. Like we did read a lot, talk to a lot of people, pulled on experiences we've had. So, I think Lindsay and I both know people who are doing related work, and I'm sure they'd be very open to being contacted or, check in with kind of what's going on with different organizations and people in Alberta.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks for your question, Patsy. And again, everyone, feel free to enter your questions in the chat. I know one question I have, I have a couple questions, but one I think that comes to mind first. So when you have this Living Labs network, it's no longer these projects happening in isolation. There's kind of this network, this hub, this support for those projects. What benefit do you think that brings instead of a model where projects just kind of happen independently on their own?
You go first, Charles.
Yeah, it's a great question, and again, I go back to one of the things I said a bit earlier in terms of my or our own motivation for kind of trying to kind of get something like this going, which is partly that when we, like, for those folks who have not visited or spent time in this region, it is a fairly geographically large region, even, and that's made to be more prominent by the lack of transportation options to even get around. So there's currently there was a Greyhound service. It was canceled, so it's very difficult to move around this region. And so Thunder Bay is like, we are a 7.5-hour drive from Winnipeg, 7.5 hours from Sault Ste. Marie. Duluth is a good 4-hour drive from here. Houghton is literally like, I mean, it takes more than a day to drive there. So, I'm just illustrating this because, and that's made even more complicated by weather and when it's winter and there's storms. So, all that, like the point being that physically moving people around is complicated. And, it's very interesting when we first planned, like we're starting this project collectively, we had all these plans to move people around the lake and go visit each other. And the pandemic hit. And, as many of you are probably aware, it was very difficult to move. Our university, like many, put a hold on any travel or any kind of in-person gatherings. And at the time, I think we were very frustrated by that and seemed like, how do we do our work? But, one of the really interesting learnings from that time, as I think many are kind of reflecting on now, is that we were really forced to use use kind of virtual communications in new and interesting ways. Even Zoom, which wasn't much of a thing before, I know it existed before the pandemic, but even becoming more confident with that now and the new features and tools. So this is a long answer to the question, but I think the point is it can feel very isolated doing projects in this region, and for us, I think finding ways to both connect people within the different spaces, but it goes across the watershed as well. And that's where we think about the idea of nested scales, right? That, it's like you need place-based work. This kind of just sustainabilities cannot exist. Confluence thinking, connected thinking, network thinking cannot happen without being rooted in place, having relationships with the land, with the water, with the people around you, recognizing the colonial histories, the racialized, all of these elements that kind of make life beautiful and complicated in place. But then connecting that across place, what we realize, especially within the Lake Superior watershed region, is that there are so many similarities. Our eco zone or our growing zone, for example, is very similar to everyone else around the lake. And, when we're trying to make decisions about policy or programs or planning, I mean, the people around the lake are the people we need to be talking to. So there's some really practical reasons to do this. One of our, Lindsay and I were helping a student doing some seed saving work around the lake. And that's, adapting seeds to this region is what we need, not seeds from Vermont or, other places in northern US, southern Ontario, that are shipped up here and we're told, plant these, because they just don't work in the northern zones. So really practical stuff, but also conceptually, thinking about what connection means, how it works, how we can learn and grow together. So anyway, it's just some thoughts.
No, that's great. And it makes me think of, you're obviously doing this in the context of sustainability. But I work primarily in the field of mental health, and even just adapting kind of the similar model of living labs can help, I think, reduce some of the siloing that tends to happen in research. And, in the mental health field, there are so many silos that we need to break barriers for. And the fact that you're breaking international barriers as well, having the labs in the States and in Canada and all working together, it seems like it would allow for a much easier ability to move that dial when you have these groups working together in a shared kind of collaborative hub. So we have one question. A very lovely prior student of yours, Charles, is Sudabay, now lives in Toronto, just graduating from a master in environmental data analytics, and is wondering how to get involved in these projects. So is there somewhere folks can go to look into either student opportunities or research assistant opportunities, other opportunities to be involved in your projects?
I'll start on that, Charles. Yeah, the first place to do, I think, go and explore our website. First of all, our students will be so pleased that folks are spending time looking at the website, because Rachel and Courtney, we have two students who do a lot of the work coordinating and sharing knowledge dissemination, that kind of work. So that's a place to start. And so we have a newsletter that goes out monthly that profile some of the kind of things that I was talking about, like some of the projects that we're doing and some of the little lessons learned from our project, but also shares about some other events that our community partners are doing and other place relevant conferences and work that's happening. So that's a good way to start to get a sense of what's going on and what we're working on. So that would certainly be a first step. And then, yeah, I mean, that's what I would say as a starting point. Did you have anything else to add to that, Charles?
Well, only that, I mean, and this is part of the way we've designed, I think not just Lindsay and I, but like collectively we've designed the network, is that it isn't meant to be, you know, an organization that like we have projects and we're recruiting people to, but more of a, as we've said, like a platform, right? So one of the other ways to get involved is if folks are doing things in the region, if they want to connect to people in the region. I mean, we have been using, you know, some of our tools through the network to support that work. So more than just the question of like, how do I get involved? You know, I would almost throw that question back and say like, what do you want to do? And how can we help you do it? Right. And that's, I think, part of the way, and I'm just looking at a question I think Nancy just threw out about, you know, how do you overcome, you know, people not feeling connected? Which is a question I have as well. It's not, you know, I don't have a great answer for it, but one of the ways that we've tried to address that is not to be overly prescriptive or overly controlling or overly centralize the network to say we make decisions and everyone else just does what we say, the way, you know, not that that's the way a nonprofit works, but often when you have leadership in a nonprofit, there's a grant. The grant is for a particular project. It needs to work that way. But we've deliberately tried to keep things kind of open so that the needs of the network, you know, or the different people involved in different projects can be, again, as Lindsay said a few times, be amplified, be connected, and to use the network to do that work. So yeah, so again, if people are interested, if there's ideas, if people live in the region, if you know people in the region, if you're interested in something, you know, definitely get in touch with us. And through the website, there's an email address, and you know, if we can help with that or connect you to the right people, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, and you know, just to reflect, I think that's such an important question, Nancy. I think we all struggle with that. That is one of the core questions of my Canada Research Share program, is really how do we do this really challenging work of learning and working together across sectors, across disciplines, across boundaries, whatever that is. And it's really, really, really hard. And there's so many reasons why it's hard. And we could spend many hours talking about the reasons why it's hard. But one of the things that we're, you know, sort of zooming into in the Living Labs Network is using place, right, as a sort of a glue, a thing that brings us together, and we all see relevance of place. So explicitly doing the place-based work and connecting and relationship building, I think, has been helpful in that. We haven't succeeded with all partners. I think some partners in our Living Lab network still have those questions. How does this advance my particular like issue? My issue is, you know, whatever it is, active transportation, and only sometimes I see the connections to that with your Living Labs network. But I think we're doing enough of that connecting and relationship building with each other in place to sustain interest and you know, people's interests. But it's certainly a challenge that I think we face in this work, and that many of us, I'm sure, on the call are also facing.
Yeah.
Oh, and one, I was going to recommend a resource. If folks haven't read this book, I'm rereading it now. It's called Emergent Strategies by Adrienne Marie Brown. It's just such a beautiful book, and it's really sort of practical. There's some practical tools within it. And it also, one of the things I love about it, it sort of has these little snippets of reminding us how nature and place inspire the work and how we work. And so that's something I think that we also have explicitly been thinking about in the Living Labs Network, is how does water, you know, inform this really challenging work that we do? And some of the words that you've been hearing Charles and I say, so confluence and flow and finding the energy and following the energy, like that's what water does, right? It flows through the landscape based on the place, following the energy towards, you know, a common place, the confluence idea. So anyway, so we've also been, I think, inspired by water as both a metaphor and sort of a guide in some ways.
Lindsay, there is ask about the book. Oh, and I see someone's just shared it in the chat already. Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. So that information is in the chat if I was looking for it. A couple more comments and questions and things coming in the chat here. So I'll jump up to Crystal's question in a moment, but first, you've already both kind of reflected on Nancy's question, but I will just read it out, reiterate, give you a chance to add anything if you'd like. So Nancy's question was, I'm working on one research project that's trying to bring together very diverse solutions based on a landscape model. We've had trouble engaging partners and stakeholders, and I think one reason is that they don't see themselves in all the different areas of work. Your project seems to have overcome this. Any tips? So again, I know you've both spoken to this already, but was there anything else you wanted to add to that point before we go to a different question?
I might just say something else based on Nancy's next question, which is Nancy's suggesting, the Great Lakes water. She's suggesting some other network. And I think another thing that we've been really conscious of is like there's lots of different networks around like in the Lake Superior region. And Nancy's pointing to another one, the freshwater future. And one of the things we've been trying to do is not to say we are the network or we're the better network, but actually to connect with those networks as well. So we've gone to conferences from other networks. We've invited people into our conferences or our meetings, our discussions, and we do a lot of cross promotion. So one of the other things, I don't think Lindsay and I mentioned this, but one of the other kind of intentions of the Lake Superior Living Labs Network, and Lindsay, I know we talked about this a lot at the beginning and we really haven't since, is that a lot of the existing networks tend to be very science-based, like biology, science. And our network tends to bring together more social scientists, humanities folks, community activists, nonprofits. So, that was a bit of a gap that we were noticing. So again, when we look at some of these really wonderful networks, there is that gap. And so we've been trying to fill that a little bit. But again, to use what we have to just keep connecting with people, and in that sense, we've always said, if our Lake Superior Living Labs Network disappeared tomorrow, it's not a loss. Like it's not a loss necessarily, because the work is happening, the people are connected, and it's not dependent on us. It's just it just will keep happening.
Yeah, and I also wonder, Charles, like just for Nancy and maybe others. So, the Living Labs model, that it's increasingly sort of people are experimenting with it. It's more common in Europe, and the reason why is because they've had a number of specific funding structures and calls with Living Labs sort of orientation. But so our group, and Charles and I were leads on this, but we conducted what's called a scoping review of Living Labs work, and so that may be helpful to go see and learn a little bit more about Living Labs. And some municipalities and some communities in particular are starting to use Living Labs as an approach. And in a lot of ways, it's like words to describe things that may be happening anyway, but sometimes just getting the right words are helpful. And one of the things I like about living and labs is those two words. I love living, and that it emphasizes and foregrounds that sort of iterative, dimension of intersectoral work, for example, and labs, that really strong focus on learning by doing. We don't sometimes know what to do, and we don't necessarily have answers, but we are called upon to start doing things differently and better, and then learning about that and sharing it. So anyway, so maybe exploring a little bit about examples of learning labs could be helpful.
And Patsy,
and I see Charles has put that in the chat, article called The Scoping Review Examining Governance, Co-Creation, and Social and Ecological Justice in Living Labs Literature. Thanks, Charles.
Yeah, I was just going to point to, again, Patsy's comment that just came in. Patsy, I see, is doing a master's in public health. And I don't know if Lindsay and I mentioned this, but we are both in the Department of Health Sciences. We both teach in the public health program, the Masters of Public Health here at Lakehead. And, for us, and, I've really been taking Lindsay's lead on a lot of the really fantastic literature around planetary health and ecological health. And I think there's a real case to be made and around the value of this kind of work for public health and for, a lot of different institutions and sectors that also tend to be very science heavy or like hard science heavy. And that's not a critique in any way, but just again, like when we talk about the kind of confluence thinking or network thinking, part of that is interdisciplinary thinking. And we both talked about that a little bit, and the need to, recognize that, qualitative, quantitative, hard science, social science, humanities, like all of these are different perspectives that help us understand, us as a human, as a more than human, those relationships. And, I would highly encourage, all of that, and not, not one over the other.
So one final question. I'll just acknowledge as well, Steve shared in the chat a resource, 5 Essential Skills for Building Cooperative Environments and Relationships by an organization called Euphoria, a technique called radical collaboration. So potential resource for folks. It looks like they're a group out of Switzerland, youth-based NGO. And jumping back up, so Crystal's question, if you can kind of briefly speak to your experiences building interest and engaging policymakers in the work that you do.
I would actually say this is an area where we have not succeeded as much as we would have liked. We have a number of partners from municipal level of government, but beyond that, and it's interesting. In part, I wonder, so a lot of what we're doing is really having, bringing a strong orientation to a regional scale, which sort of, in my view, is absent. We talk a lot about like local and global and global and local and whatever, but like clearly there is a regional level within that that is necessary. So we're sort of really operating on that level. And so in some ways that doesn't align as well with sort of provincial or national kind of policymakers. But we do have partners, for example, from Thunder Bay, from the city, that have been some of the more engaged actually members. So supporting very much the work with our Climate Action Field School, so coming and doing really great workshops on different things. For example, how young people can come to city council and do a deputation, for example. Also highly involved with our Climate Action Park, and so supporting that both in monetary ways actually, and also in kind ways in terms of what the park could and should look like. So we have succeeded at that scale in terms of engaging, and that's true I think across our hubs. I'm sharing the Thunder Bay perspective in particular, but beyond the municipal level, I would say we haven't succeeded as well as we might have hoped early on. But maybe that's something to keep in mind moving forward. Charles, did you have more to add?
I realize we have 4 minutes left, so maybe I'll just say very quickly. I think when we think about how does policy change, one, yes, policymakers do it, and they sit in rooms and they debate and they discuss, but also it's very much influenced by communities and what people do. So I think, as I mentioned, a lot, especially where we are in Ontario, a lot of policies get decided in Southern Ontario and get transplanted up here, and they don't usually make a lot of sense for this region. So I think what we're doing, as Lindsay said, like, it's not that we're necessarily meeting with and debating and developing policy, but we are creating evidence, we are creating momentum, we're creating discussion around communities around these things. And I gave that example of the seed stuff, which isn't a direct policy issue, but it is an issue of, like, again, a good example of how, if we want to develop seeds for this region, we need to do it with people in this region. Like thinking on an ecosystems kind of level or scale or regional scale, as Lindsay suggested, as opposed to just like this seed, it's organic, it's from here, which is, and I don't have time to get into all the details of that. We do have a video on the website around this project, which I highly suggest everyone watch. I'll just say really quickly in the last minute, Steve was asking about this illustration. It's an image by Christy Belcourt and Isaac Murdoch. They were up here in Thunder Bay, and we did some screen printing with them a few years ago. And this is one of the many screen prints we did. So it's a Water is Life.
Thanks for sharing, Charles. And so 2 minutes left, so I'll just do a quick wrap up before folks continue on with their days today. I've just put some links in the chat for everyone. So one of those links is to where you'll find the webinar recording. So you can find that under our website, the resource page, webinar and discussion. So you can rewatch this webinar or previous webinars, share this webinar with other folks, find all of that there. Another link I shared with you was the registration link for our next e-learning event happening November 16th. The topic for that one will be moving the dial on inclusive and innovative models for refugee health equity. So encourage folks to join us for that event as well. The third link I shared with you was where you can sign up for our newsletter if you're not already signed up. This is where you'll find information about our other upcoming events, including our community of practice and other events. Members can also submit news articles to us for inclusion in our e-news. So if you are a member and want us to share your information out, be in touch with us. Lastly, I shared a feedback form. So you can scan the QR code on the screen here or go to the link in the chat that I posted to give us some feedback on this session, including suggestions or ideas for future sessions. So we'd love to hear from you, as always, how we can improve our programs for our members. So that's all for today. That's all from us. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, for your questions and your comments. Thank you, of course, Charles and Lindsay, for sharing your knowledge with us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All
Great,
right.
thanks for having us.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you for joining us.